Afternoon, folks. We're here working on a little half fence, little 42-inch height fence for our property. And someone had asked about whether, building decks or outdoor type of projects were good, woodworking for beginner type of thing. And we think yes, it is, because you're working with this lumber, and there's a little more wiggle room to make corrections as you go along. But you learn how to use saws and measure and make decisions and make corrections as you go along. Chopping up some pressure treated pine versus maybe $100 board of walnut to start with. But what we like to do, also give you some tips, what we've learned through the years on fencing, is we set our post into the ground about close to 2 feet here. There's a lot of clay, so we had it dug out with a post hole digger by our friend. Put it in, got those dried in a couple of days, and then started cutting those off to the height we want them. The posts are about 40 inches up, and the fence picket will go another couple inches above the top of the post. So one thing when you're working outdoors, the ground's not always level, so you may have to have something. You might need a longer post at one end, or end up cutting a lot off the other post at the other end. And unless you're really good, really experienced at it, putting these posts in, we set them 8 feet apart. Then that's 96 inches. Post might come in, the center of the post right in here might come in at 97 or 96 and a half, or if you're working on repairing an old fence, you might find out the posts aren't perfectly spaced apart. So you can take a lot of measurements, or you can spend a few dollars like we did, and we use a 2x4 for a backer rail instead of those little small backer rails. It tends to keep the fence looking straighter and sturdier. Instead of buying them 8 feet, we bought them 10 feet, and we'll use those little cut-off pieces for something else. But when we started, that way you don't find out your gap is 8 feet and a couple of inches, and your 8 foot 2x4 is too short. So for example, on this one, I don't know, we must have been talking and not paying attention here. This one, and I'm measuring from edge to edge, so it's 98 inches. This one's 2 inches off from being on a 8 foot. There's your 8 foot mark right there. So I measured from edge to edge. So you can measure edge to edge, and then that'll give you your middle to middle measurement. It also gives you your other edge to edge measurement. I know this is real basic for some of you folks, but new folks starting out, might be a way for them to learn, or share your tips, please, when you're out there working on your things. So each set, what I'm getting to, the long story, is that each set of these 2x4s are going to be cut to different lengths, because the posts are not exactly 8 foot apart. That could be for a variety of reasons. But when you do set them in, you do want to have this one edge that your boards are running on. This inner edge right here, the face of your post going out, you do want to have that as close to being as aligned as you can. And you can have it perfectly aligned the first day you put it out. Come out the next day, find out the lumber's dried a little bit, and you've got a little bit of a twist in it as the lumber dries, which is what's happened on this last post for the tall fence. A couple other tips. We run a string, mark it, and then come along, and that gives us alignment point, because as I said, this ground is up and down here. So some places this little picket will be touching the ground, other places it may be 1 inch to 2 inches off, and we're going to try to level that a little bit. But we do like to leave airspace below the picket, so that a little weed eater trimmer line can get in there, and it's not, also so the picket's not in direct contact with the ground, because it'll start rotting. from the bottom up, even if you're pressure treated, and you'll be out there at a later date trimming it to keep it looking nice and to slow the rot down. Last thing we'll talk about here is these fasteners we like to use. Kind of these common deck fasteners you can find. Grip-Right was a brand we used for a long time, and these are similar too, but not exactly Grip-Right. But it's got a star drive, and it's got its self-piloting, we'll say, with this little tip on the end of it. So you don't need to drill a pilot hole. And then when you get to the head of the screw here, there's little, I don't know if they'll show up on this, there's little indentations that will countersink this screw head. And we like to keep the screw head just right below the surface. Now when this wood's still wet, it's going to shrink a little bit this way, that way, and even lengthwise a little bit. So when it shrinks, that screw head will be right about where it was, right about where we like it. This one up here I put in a little bit too deep, but it's not going to affect it over the long run. And I've used thousands of these screws on tens of thousands of square feet of decks and piers and docks and those kinds of things. And usually there's other parts of the dock failing before the screw ever fails. Some people like stainless for that and square drive, and I'd say that's great as long as you get the good stainless and not the stuff that stole us stainless that came from overseas, from a country that rhymes with China, because those heads strip out really fast. Ask us how we know. But those are some of our tips, and yes, we think this is a good project for beginners to work on. Maybe you just make a little small fence panel or a little bench, or a lot of people like to make planters and things like that, and get going so you can get introduced to some of your basic tools. Like, I think pretty much everyone needs a drill. I think everyone can agree on that. And then over there is our little, we have the little smaller circular saw, which has been working fine on these projects. Need a tape measure, need a little pencil, a level, maybe a little tool pouch, carry some screws around. Gonna need a hammer. Oh, I did have the last thing was this little tape measure. Let's see if I can figure out who made it. That'd probably be a good thing. It's called fastcap.com, 16 footer. We're not paid by them, but what I like, it says it's a lefty righty, so you can read it. As you can see, you can read it either way, whether you're measured that way or came back around and went the other way. And it's got good marks for folks with a little bit older eyes like me, maybe. Come along. It's got your 16 foot, which is a common spacing for studs. And then so you come along here, so that'll save you some math if you're doing 16 foot on center studs. And this one we haven't used the feature yet, but it does have your little scratch pad here where you can take your pencil and write down what your measurement was. So if you forget from the time you leave the work site over to the lumber pile, you can write it on here and rub it off, erase it. And it's also got a nice little spring clip, so I can clip it on my belt instead of some of those others you're trying to jam down on there. So I hope y'all are having a good time. We hope these tips are helpful, and we'd like to hear some of your tips. That about does it.